my feeling on October 7th was they have to resign.
I think all of us felt this. I mean, there are people from left to right, even supporters of Netanyahu, who are like, enough.
If we hold elections, what solution will that bring for our security, for our peace, and for our hostages?
It's Sophie's choice every single day. Everybody should be approaching the issue of the hostages like it's their child. There's no other way to look at this.
Welcome back to another episode of The Quad on JNS. I'm here in the studio with the former Canadian ambassador to Israel and the founder of the state of Tel Aviv, Vivian Bercovici. Of course, here next to me, we also have Ashira Solomon, political moderator. And all the way from India this week is our fearless, outgoing deputy mayor of Jerusalem and current special envoy at the foreign ministry, Fleur Hassan-Nahoum. Fleur and everyone, thanks for joining us. It's been another crazy week, almost 6 months, I wish 6 weeks, of war. And we are now asking the question, is Israel doing enough? Are we doing enough to get our hostages back? Has the government done their job? And what more can be done? Vivian, what's your take on what's happening?
My take is it really sucks. I mean, I don't think that they've done enough. I don't think that they've done the right things in the right order. Really easy to be an armchair quarterback, but that's what we do here, right?
That is the whole point.
That is the whole point. I mean, we're here 6 months on. For 3 weeks, we did not go in with boots on the ground. I've always said that was our huge missed opportunity, was the shock and awe response right away. Okay, so that's water under the bridge. But, I mean, the hostage families and the nation are really on a razor edge now, and for good reason. Why are they either not home? Why have we not yet gone into Rafah? What has been going on really for the last 2 months there?
Yeah, it's almost like there's a lot of back and forth. Like either you're in or you're out. And the country has kind of been like not deciding what they want to do. Yeah.
And the government, in fairness, is not doing a great job of communicating with us. And then there's all the other stuff around it. Like, the fact that it's totally known and out in the open. There's tremendous tension between the war cabinet and the government, and lots of disagreements on serious issues and more leaks, which is always a sign in Israel that things are kind of in a state of stasis, if I can put it that way.
Yeah.
Which is not good.
Asira, what is your take?
I agree with both of what you guys both said. I think I have more questions than statements. I'm looking at that we're having more protests, anti-government protests. Everyone in Israel wants a new government. My question is, if we have a new government, if we hold elections, what solution will that bring for our security, for our peace, and for our hostages? Like,
I can answer that.
Okay, great.
Wait, what do you think will happen?
Look, first of all, I would just say not everyone feels there should be a new government. I do think polls sort of demonstrate that the overwhelming majority of people feel we are definitely overdue for a change in government. I think what would it change is there would be some possibility of restoring hope and trust in the public, among the public in the government. We have, with the greatest respect to the individuals who currently form the coalition government and, quote, lead us, and IDF leadership, we have the same people who got us into this mess.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't know about others watching, or my colleagues here or Fleur, but my feeling on October 7th was they have to resign. It's just...
I think all of us felt this. I mean, there are people from left to right, even supporters of Netanyahu, who are like, enough,
So it's like, okay, we can't do it right at the time of war. We're 6 months on, for goodness sake. I mean, the quality of decision-making continues because it's the same crowd, but more importantly, the kind of, the entrenched, and I hate to put it this way, but the entrenched self-interest and group interests and political interests that led us to the bad decisions that led to October 7th prevail and continue today. And that's not good. And the people no longer trust the key institutions and leaders of this country.
I mean, I think it's just been really disturbing that at a time when we still have over 100 hostages there, when we have, 14 women who we know are being sexually abused, according to the hostages who have already come back home. They have testified that they witnessed it, that some of them experienced this as well.
Not to mention.
And we're sitting around arguing over the IDF draft bill for ultra-Orthodox, which should be serving we're in a war. They should be serving in the military anyway. Like, it's ridiculous, the things that we're focusing on. And now they're talking about the coalition maybe falling as a result of that. I mean, it's craziness. Fleur, I would love to hear what your take is on this situation. Are we doing enough? What else can we do?
Look, it's very difficult to judge and to say that any other leader would have handled the war militarily in a different way. I think it's very easy to sit in judgment. It's much harder to be the people managing that cabinet. It's Sophie's choice every single day. The cabinet has got a varied of opinion, and I want to feel there is some trust left. I'm just very sour about the fact that the hostage family and their supporters have to constantly fight to keep to the top of the priority agenda. Because in my opinion, every single person who sits in that security cabinet, and I have to say, there's not one woman there in the small security cabinet. That makes me sick already. But everybody should be approaching the issue of the hostages like it's their child. There's no other way to look at this. It's unfair to look at it any other way. Whatever choice you make, just pretend that's your child there. What would be your choice? And that's what I think.
And I have to jump in because you're right. It is easy to, armchair quarterback. It is easy there's Sophie's choice every single day. But I do have to respond with two very quick comments. Number one, it took 5 days for Netanyahu to agree to form a war cabinet because he had to deal with Ben Gvir and his objections. 5 days is an eternity in this situation. That does not signal to me that anyone is putting the hostages as a priority. The second thing is I regrettably disagree that every member of this government, in particular the war cabinet, feels the same way. We have the recent comments from Minister of Finance Bezalel Smotrich, who said very plainly the hostages are not the most important issue. We know that there is a very significant difference of opinion among the government, both the opposition and the coalition government members, with respect to the primary importance of the hostage issue. So I'm not letting them off the hook quite as easily. Sorry.
No, I gave the credit to the families for making themselves that priority.
I think some of these accusations are unfair. As much as I fault the government, some of them are unfair because I think Israel has actually been trying to make some sort of deal repeatedly. I mean, Hamas has now rejected 2 or 3 in a row, even when Israel was willing to release like 700, 800 hostages. But in general, the government has been extremely problematic on this issue. I mean, I think that's why we see so many protests from members of hostage families. What, Fleur? Sorry?
I just want to say that I don't think it's helped that the international community are not putting enough pressure on Hamas and Qatar. They're putting the pressure on us. And that puts them up a tree, keeps them up that tree.
Hugely important point. And that's a point that should have been thwacked and thumped from day one, that the pressure should have been on Hamas, on Qatar, and through Qatar to Hamas. But that gets into, the U.S. and their big, strong, important allyship with Qatar, largest base in the Middle East, all that. Yes, okay, maybe I'm being too harsh, but I'm actually not, because it took way too long for the government, in my view, to really engage in the negotiations for the hostage release. I think that they probably thought that things were going to turn out differently for all kinds of reasons.
I'm conflicted with this. I look at it like, we're one big family and our whole entire house is on fire. And like, while our house is on fire, is it the time to start rearranging furniture, or do we just focus on the goal, which is to eliminate Hamas and get our hostages home? But I understand we have like all this internal.
We're also dealing with the people who allowed the arsonists to come in and set the house on fire.
That is true.
That's I guess what the side of the protesters would be saying on this issue.
We're more like we're maybe in a duplex. I'm not sure we're one big family.
I wish it was funny. That's pretty grim reality.
It's black humor, that's what we call it.
Yeah. The reality is, how I see it, is that from day one being October 8th in this case, on the Israeli side, we didn't have any strategy. We didn't have any strategy approaching this issue to begin with in terms of what to do with the civilians in Gaza when we're carrying out this operation, how to deal with the international media, how to deal with the hostages from day one. What if, just hypothetically, and I would love to get your opinion on this, what if Israel had responded on October 8th and said to all the international community behind the scenes, behind closed doors and in the media, you have 48 hours to bring back our hostages and Hamas unconditionally surrender, and the Palestinian Authority or whoever can take over the Gaza Strip, at least temporarily, until there is some sort of international community consensus on who should rule the Gaza Strip, and we won't launch a war. That's what should have happened. Because at least then, the entire world would have seen that all of the responsibility for this war falls on Hamas for refusing to back down. And I really believe that not a single Palestinian civilian, at least, would have been killed had we taken that path and had the international community, especially the Arab world, crack down on Hamas. If their response had been like, this is not happening, I don't think we would be seeing what we're seeing today. And as a result of that lack of strategy, people aren't seeing this war through the right prism. Fleur?
I don't agree. How many times have we said, if only we do this, the world will see? Sorry, in 2005, we left the Gaza Strip and we said the same thing. This is going to show the world that we don't want to rule over them. And after the first rocket was launched, do you think the world gave a shit? Sorry, do you think the world cared? Do you think anybody said anything about that first rocket? Don't overestimate the rest of the world and their
claim we had genocidal intent if that was Israel's initial response. And now they are claiming that.
I think
it's not true.
They would have found another way, Emily. They would have found something else to pin on us, really.
So, yeah, and I think that, listen, if it's Jews, they would have found a way to say there's genocidal intent, there's everything under the sun. Having said that, I think that the government and the IDF should have made it very clear to the world that release of the hostages immediately is a priority, including the soldiers. And that wasn't done. And there's a reason that wasn't done. And that's because there was chaos in the government.
I agree.
There was chaos in the IDF. Nobody knew what was going on. That's a fact. And we know that at this point. And Bibi and his advisors were busy negotiating with Ben Gvir how to manage him for 5 days in order to ensure that there were competent people in the war cabinet. And that is exactly why we should have a new government.
So your take on what should be done is we should have a new government, a better government.
Yeah, people who, and we should have also, if I may invoke Rachel Goldberg-Polin, whose son Hirsch is a hostage in Hamas and whose arm, we know his dominant left arm was blown off when he was taken. She's made the point tirelessly, and I totally agree with her, that there is, and you just mentioned it, or you or Fleur, that there are no women in that room, and that is significant.
Yeah.
I mean, when I look at the pictures of the cabinet of this government, when I look at the pictures of the war cabinet of this government, I do not see myself remotely represented. And Rachel has been making the point that there really must be women at the table, and it's not because of, DEI. It's because we do bring something different to the analysis and to the consideration. And you're quite right. Maybe had there been a woman or two around the table, like Miri Eisen, in those early days, they would have handled the hostage and communications issues much differently.
We are better at communicating.
Way better.
That's for sure.
Way better. That's why you watch us.
Yes.
No, I just think in general, decisions are better when there is gender diversity, because we see things in different ways. And this is what bothers me in general about leadership in Israel, specifically about the management of the war. There's not one woman. That really, really bothers me. Sorry, I've said my piece with that.
I think we all agree. I think we all agree on that front.
Yeah, we're all in the sisterhood.
Yeah. Well, this week we did have an opportunity to sit down for a very special interview. Let's take a look.
And now we have a very special guest on our show this week, my friend Richard Peta, who's the Director of BICOM, the Britain-Israel Communications and Research Center, dealing with so many journalists for so many years. And Richard also has a background as working in the government press office of Israel. And this week, Richard, we had a controversy about Al-Jazeera, the organization, the channel that has basically been propagating so much anti-Israel hatred, news. And the Knesset decided that they wanted to close it down here in Israel, as many of us agree with. And then we had today a statement from the Press Association, from the Free Press Association, that we should consider not closing it because it infringes on free speech. So we have a very real debate. You have a lot of experience in this. What do you make of all of this?
Fleur, thank you very much indeed for having me on your show. I think this issue is quite complicated, and I think it's worth, first of all, understanding the real details of what the Knesset is debating and the details of this proposed bill. First of all, I think two points. First of all, it talks about the potential to close down a foreign news network if they are physically harming Israel's national security. So one example of that would be that if someone is broadcasting the movements of Israeli troops on an operation in real time, that can serve obviously as valuable intelligence for the enemy, and that would cross the line, and they would therefore be liable for sanctions. The second important component of this law is that it is a temporary measure. It is part of the context of the war that we find ourselves now, and this is not a permanent banning. And the third element is the criteria that they set. Not only does there need to be an agreement between the Prime Minister and the Communications Minister, but it also then goes, and who'd have thought this current government would empower the judiciary, but it needs the clearance of I think it's a regional district judge in order to confirm the law as well. So that there are all these, the checks and balances built into this rule creates quite a high threshold for this rule. Now, in the case of Al-Jazeera in particular, I would also make a distinction between Al-Jazeera in English language and in Arabic, because although my Arabic is not great, I understand from colleagues, and we probably know them as well, that the Arab language Al-Jazeera is really where the damage is done, is really where they are seen as propagandizing and a branch of the Hamas extended network of media. I'll make another point that when I was recently in Ramallah just last month, talking to a political analyst, one of his explanations as to why the Palestinian population are still giving Hamas overall support is that they haven't been exposed to the same details of the atrocities that Hamas committed that we have. And therefore, Al-Jazeera is seen as the central component, Al-Jazeera Arabic, of shielding Hamas, of limiting the debate and preventing that population, the viewers, from really understanding the true nature of Hamas. However, as I said in the beginning, the fact that they are propagandizing is not necessarily enough of a threshold to actually have them banned. And so this bill calibrates that and builds that into it.
So it sounds to me, Richard, that the Israeli government is really going through great pains to ensure that freedom of speech is not infringed per se, but taking the angle that they are actually a threat to our national security, not because of the propaganda, but because what they could be saying that could affect our operations on the ground.
I think so. That's very much my understanding as well. I think it's quite clear Israel shares the same values as our Western allies, and one of those values, the freedom of the press, even if they're writing and reporting anti-Israel material, the value as a principle to be upheld is very important. And I know from my experience working inside the system within the government press office, regardless of how a reporter was kind of pro or anti-Israel, the important principle of accepting that freedom of speech and the ability to criticize Israel very vehemently and strictly is a value that is upheld. And I think even though there is a lot of criticism, and Al-Jazeera is at the top of that list, even they have that right still to of the freedom, even though they don't imbue that same courtesy into their audiences.
I mean, if you're telling me that the Arabic is worse than the English, I can't imagine how much worse it can get, because I've seen the English. I recently traveled and I switched on to the telly and I watched Al Jazeera, and it's I call it Gestapo TV. I don't think there's ever been a news channel which is so anti-Israel, blood libels, anything you can think of. I can't even begin to imagine how the Arabic channel is so much worse, but I believe you. And what do you make of the Press Association trying to come out in their defense?
Well, I'm not sure that's what the Press Association is doing. I think what they're trying to do is just represent their constituency, as in the foreign media, and just make sure, send a message and a signal to the Israeli government not to infringe on the rights of the freedom of the press. And I think they're pushing on an open door there, because I don't think that's the Israeli agenda.
Well, that's the difference between us and our enemies. Richard, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for your insights.
Thank you, Fleur.
And now for our most popular segment, Scumbags and Heroes. Fleur, you are all the way in India. Let's hear from you first. Who is your scumbag of the week?
Well, right here in India, I switched on the TV and I was reminded who the biggest scumbag of all are. And that is Al Jazeera, who I have now renamed Goebbels TV. Al Jazeera is the largest proponent of Jew hatred in the world right now. It's not even Iran, sorry, Emily. It's Al Jazeera who is the mouthpiece of everything that is bad, including Iran. They have done, in this war, they have really done the work that Goebbels did for Nazi propaganda in the 30s and the 40s. I wish I was exaggerating. There is not a semblance of balance. It is all about Israel being bloodthirsty killers, morning, noon, and night. And I used to be interviewed on Al Jazeera. I did one interview at the beginning of the war, and then they, even though it was a live interview, they twisted and turned it and took pieces, and I decided I am no longer doing any more interviews with Al Jazeera. And I'm very happy to say that yesterday, the Knesset passed a law to get them at least temporarily banned from this country. And I know that's not going to solve the problem completely or at all, because they still will get videos from Gaza. But at least we are not hosting them in our country when they're actively trying to destroy our people.
Yeah, I think it's long overdue. That's something that we've been calling for a long time. So Fleur's scumbag of the week is Al Jazeera. I think we can all agree that they are definitely scumbags, have been since before October 7th, and of course continue to be after. Ashira, who is your scumbag?
My scumbag of the week is Abdullah Akhil. I think that's how you pronounce his last name. He led the NYC land protest this week, and he was calling for a ceasefire, and in the same breath saying, strike, strike Tel Aviv. And I'm just like, you idiot. And so I'm really hoping that the world is watching and paying attention and taking notes. First of all, they call for ceasefire, which they say is synonymous with peace. We all know ceasefire and peace are not synonymous. And then you call for acts of terrorism against Israel, specifically Tel Aviv. And so really, no, you really want the annihilation of Israel and the Jewish people. You don't want a ceasefire and you don't want peace.
Well, you know what's interesting is actually, I think it was the day before, there was that protest, another protest in New York, where they were chanting down with the USA, in plain English, okay? Down with the USA. And Al-Qassam, which is Hamas, the militant, the terrorist wing, even though they're all terrorists, of Hamas, Al-Qassam is coming. Like,
and did you see this one guy? He was chanting, saying, "Children, join us! Children, join us! This is the resistance!" And people are just like, "Are you guys waking up, America? Like,
crazy.
They're coming." Yeah,
it's crazy, crazy. Vivian, your scumbag.
One guess. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, ring that bell, ding, ding, ding. You know, I had my cup runneth over this week, but
we could do a whole episode on only Justin Trudeau with a special with Vivian Bercovici.
You know what? I'd have a lot of people who would want in on that episode.
I do too.
So, he's got great socks and good hair, I know. But all joking aside, Canada's become a really, really a serious hotbed for this Islamism and for the anti-Semitic demonstrations and protests, targeting of Jews, one of the more violent places. There have been Molotov cocktail attacks on schools, and synagogues have been vandalized, and it goes on and on and on. Jewish businesses. On Sunday, though, it was a big day of something everywhere. And there was a demonstration in downtown Toronto, and the pro-Hamas thugs became very violent with police, and there were altercations, and it escalated. And I was watching this kind of throughout the day, and then at some point, one of the protesters actually took some horse manure and threw it at a cop. And that, after 6 months of Jews being threatened, physically assaulted, all kinds of incitement to hatred, that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, on you call that peaceful protest, calling for the annihilation of Israel and the murder of Jews, and allowing incitement on the streets of Toronto openly to call that peaceful protest, that is horse manure. And you know it. But now the good news is that the police clearly have their breaking point, and now they're kind of fed up. It's like, hey, you can go after the Jews for 6 months. That's cool. But you dare throw some, horse at us. That's when things get really serious. That was one incident. And another one, which is also really, really disturbing, is that it was in a demonstration in a predominantly Muslim neighborhood in Toronto. Police came, they're always there, but there's a Palestinian woman who is amazing. Her name's Karima Saad, and she goes around and records all of these demonstrations, and she's very neutral in her reporting. She's fantastic. She's independent, and she's also a lawyer. And she's recording these guys just kind of doing what they do and yelling and calling for the annihilation of Israel and death to Jews and all that. And they came over and assaulted her. And they said, get out of our effing neighborhood. We don't want you here. You're not welcome here. It's like, whoa, you have been targeting and threatening and blocking predominantly Jewish neighborhoods for 6 months. Nobody asked you to come. You didn't get any invitations. Like, who's making the rules here? Toronto police have absolutely failed in enforcing the law, but that is because Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has set the tone at the top and told the country Jews are fair game, and we're not.
I think that's actually weird to say good, but good segue into my scumbag this week, which is the UK, the London Metropolitan Police, which we're seeing similar, not quite the same, but we're seeing similar problems, and connected to what you said, and from NYPD, from the police in America, with some of the protests that have happened there. We've seen it in the UK, where I just was last week, and of course we've seen it in Canada, as you detailed, and of course responsibility is at the top for that. But my scumbag is actually the police in the UK this week, because I was at some of these anti-Israel demonstrations. They're extremely pro-terror. They're chanting in favor of the Houthis. They're chanting in favor of Hamas. When the pro-Israel side, through the loudspeaker, asked them if they support Hamas, they cheered. So these are people who are talking about being pro-Palestinian. These are people who are anti-Israel. They're anti-West. They're anti-UK. And the government is scared of them. These are bullies. Absolutely. They're bullying other Muslims into silence. Of course, they're bullying the rest of the population. And it's not about Palestinians. For them, it's about Islamic supremacy, ultimately. And instead of deterring that and taking action, the police have been sort of like, well, we don't know. We have to put it in context, which is why they're my scumbag this week, because they actually responded to a young woman who asked the police to arrest one of the attendees of this protest, who had a swastika on his sign at an anti-Israel march, right? And he responded by saying, well, it depends on the context, right, if a swastika is illegal or if it would be illegal. And she, went on to have a longer discussion with him about this. I actually posted most of that discussion.
Would you like to walk with me? Because I can point these people out to you. And again, I was told when I asked that a swastika was not necessarily anti-Semitic or disruptive to public worship. That doesn't seem right to me.
Okay, so I think the symbol in of itself.
It is. Oh my God. It is. Film. Please film. Please, for the love of God, film. It is anti-Semitic. So, is a swastika... not allowed...
I didn't say it wasn't.
In what context is a swastika not anti-Semitic and disruptive to public order? That's just my question.
I don't have an in-depth knowledge of signs and symbols. I don't know how everybody would feel about that sign. Now, if you came up to me and you felt harassed, alarmed, distressed about a symbol that someone was...
I'm extremely distressed. I'm very alarmed. I offered to take you to people who have those signs and are still walking around.
The Metropolitan Police responded by claiming, oh, well, this is just a clip of a long conversation and the person was arrested, which she actually disputed. I spoke to her yesterday. So there's a lot of dishonesty. There's a lot of moral cowardice. And we're seeing the same behavior from a lot of different police around the world. And the thing that's scary about it is that this extremist pro-terror behavior is not going to get better. It's going to get worse. And the only way to deal with it isn't to throw 30, 40, 50 cops to protect a minority Jewish population in any of these countries. The solution to it is prosecuting, arresting, and actually deterring the perpetrators of this harassment and of, in some cases, these even physical attacks against Jews and Jewish community and their allies. And it's just despicable. It's despicable. So, shame on you. Shame on you to the Metropolitan Police.
And Toronto Police.
And NYPD. And with that, let's move to the heroes.
Yay, heroes.
Fleur, now that we've heard all of the scumbags, I want to start with you. Who is your hero this week?
Well, my hero is a very brave woman called Amit Susanna, who basically was a hostage, and she came out a few months ago, but imagine the trauma it's taken her a few months to, I guess, find her voice and talk about the horrible sexual abuse she suffered in captivity, to give us at least a window into what our 14, 15 women there are going through today. 40-year-old women, she was no girl, and she suffered horrendously, and she's brave enough to be able to come out and tell her story. Can't be easy for her. It must be very re-traumatizing for her, but she's doing this so that people actually understand who these animals are. And so hats off for her bravery to this incredible woman, not just for going through what she went through, but for now going and talking about it to try and help her sisters and get them out of it.
Absolutely. I know there were some of the responses like on social media, people were saying, oh, well, she's lying, she's making things up. I mean, it's like, it doesn't matter how much evidence is, they'll make up an excuse for everything. Vivian, who's your hero?
So my hero, actually Ashira's got my hero, but so I'm gonna have to pivot, and it's okay. I'll do. I can dance on a head of a pin. My heroes are the hostage families, all of them, and the survivors. I was going to use one as a kind of example to focus on, but it's been a pretty wild kind of week, 10 days here. A lot of information is coming out about the way in which the released hostages and the hostage families have just been let down by the government. The government just isn't there to offer any support. And one of the things that just blew me away was when we learned that there is not a single member of the government who's reached out to, I think, 99% of the hostages who have been released.
Sad.
I mean, it's just incomprehensible to me that they haven't even picked up a phone and said, how are you? Never mind, go to visit them. And so they're all my heroes because they are just under unbearable, unrelenting, in fact, escalating pressure and trauma. Even those released, almost all of them have a loved one who remains in captivity. And it's just corroding their families, themselves, and it is corroding the soul of this nation. So they're my heroes for just kind of getting up every day and doing it.
Definitely heroes. Ashira?
My hero of the week is Moran Stella Yanai. She was a hostage for 54 days. She has come out and told about her story of sexual harassment. She said she can't even begin to even unpack the type of sexual harassment that she experienced. She's my hero because these women don't owe us their stories. They don't owe us to put their pain on display for the whole entire world to see and to judge and to deny. And of course, from Israel's side, of course, they have lots of support, but to put something very intimate out there, that trauma to share with us, it really strengthens all of us, I believe. And she also said, listen, I will not allow them to label me as a victim. We are strong women and we're going to continue to be strong. And I was just like blown away because she was victimized, but she's saying, no, I'm choosing not to be a victim and I'm going to keep strong and I'm going to keep pushing and keep telling my story. So I'm just thankful that all of them share their pain with us and their stories.
Yeah, I think her interview was really, really moving.
It was very powerful.
You could see how strong she was just through a few words even of the interview. Really, really moving. My hero, of course, I agree with both of you about the heroes, but my hero this week is actually taking me, back to my scumbag in relation. I mentioned the young woman who confronted the UK police in that video. So she is actually my hero of the week. Her name is Jocelyn Weiss. She's a documentary filmmaker and as of late an activist as well. But her, along with many members of the Jewish community in the UK, which are very small in comparison to what you see on the other side at those anti-Israel marches, she showed up to stand up for Israel and to push back. And she did exactly what should be done in those situations. She went to the authorities. She made them aware of the fact that there's blatant and illegal under UK law anti-Semitism at that protest, incitement to violence, all the things that the police are supposed to be dealing with that they aren't. And she took him to task. And after speaking with her, I was really impressed because she had spoken to police at another location of that march who then instructed her to go to another policeman. So there was more than one policeman who claimed that they needed somehow context for this swastika sign that was at the protest in the UK, which is insane because the context is a swastika at an anti-Israel march. It doesn't take a genius to do that, but I applaud her for having the courage to be brave and to be bold and to be outspoken in a very, very difficult and threatening situation. I mean, the situation in London is very, very scary. It's a lot of extremism. I would say it's even more extreme than what we see in most Middle Eastern countries when it comes to Israel. Wow. So Jocelyn Weiss, thank you very much. You're my hero of the week, along with all of the pro-Israel voices who show up and speak out and continue to hang hostage flyers, the Iranian community and the Jewish community in the UK, heroes of the week. And I think that brings us to the end of this episode of The Quad. If you haven't already, be sure to like and subscribe so you never miss an episode of The Quad. Thank you to Vivian, Ashira, and Fleur out there in India, and we'll see you next week.